At my birthday celebration, my mother murmured words into my dad's ear. I perceived a stark change in his eyes before I reacted. The next second, his push sent me tumbling to the ground. Dazed, I lay still as they began to move off until a low laugh broke from my lips. They stopped. His face bleached of all color. You won't believe this, but have you ever seen a father violently shove his own daughter to the ground at her birthday party? Not out of drunken rage, but because his wife, my adoptive mother, whispered a single, chilling command. My 29th birthday. 127 of Boston's most powerful people watched it happen. They saw me crash onto cold marble, blood trickling from my lip, my designer dress torn. But what made their champagne glasses freeze mid-sip wasn't the violence. It was my laughter. That slow, deliberate chuckle that escaped as I lay there, staring up at the crystal chandelier that probably cost more than most people's homes. Because in that exact moment, as my adoptive parents stood over me with triumph in their eyes, they had no idea they'd just triggered the complete destruction of their $3.2 billion empire. My name is Elise Harrington, and this is the story of how 4 years of meticulous planning turned my own birthday party into the most explosive courtroom Boston never saw coming. The Harrington estate in Beacon Hill wasn't just a house, it was a monument to old money. $18 million of limestone and legacy. Portraits of dead industrialists judged you from every wall. I'd lived there for 25 years, ever since Victoria and James Harrington pulled me from the wreckage of my biological parents' car accident when I was 4. This is Elise, our little charity project. Victoria would purr at every gala, her manicured hand on my shoulder, feeling more like a shackle than an embrace. We saved her from the foster system. Isn't that right, dear? I'd learned to smile and nod, playing the grateful orphan, while Boston's elite cooed about the Harringtons' generosity. What they didn't see were the locked doors, the forced signatures on documents I wasn't allowed to read, the systematic erasure of my identity. For 25 years, I was their living tax deduction, their proof of humanitarian virtue. Every charity board in the city knew the story, how the Harringtons had taken in a traumatized child, given her the best education, introduced her to society. Harvard Law School, they'd remind everyone, as if my achievements were their creation, not my escape. But behind those oak doors, I was less than staff. Staff got paid. Staff could quit. I was inventory, an asset to be managed, controlled, and eventually liquidated. The first hint that something darker was happening came during my second year at Morrison & Associates. I'd been reviewing my trust fund statements, something Victoria had always handled, to spare me the burden when I noticed discrepancies. Small at first, a few thousand here, a transfer there. Then, like a punch to the gut, I found the pattern. Over 4 years, $47 million had been systematically drained from the trust my biological parents had left me. Money that should have been mine at 25, according to their will. Money that had vanished into a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. Family doesn't question family, James had said dismissively when I tried to ask about it. Just sign here, trust us. But trust, I was learning, was a luxury I could no longer afford. The real scope of their theft became horrifyingly clear during a late night at my law firm. I'd been tracing the money transfers, following paper trails that led to 12 different shell companies, all registered in Delaware, all with innocuous names like Beacon Holdings LLC and Heritage Investment Partners. Just sign here, Elise. No need to read everything. Victoria's saccharine voice echoed in my memory as I stared at my own signature on documents I'd never seen before. Documents that authorized the transfer of millions from my trust into accounts I didn't control. That's when the pieces clicked into place, chilling me to my core. They'd been drugging me. Small doses of sedatives in my morning coffee on signing days, just enough to make me compliant, foggy. I'd always thought it was stress from law school, from work, but the pattern was too perfect. Every signing day, followed by exhaustion and memory gaps. My salary at Morrison & Associates was $180,000 a year, respectable for a fourth-year associate, but every cent was monitored. Direct deposit into an account Victoria had helped me set up. Credit cards she reviewed monthly for my protection. Even my work bonuses mysteriously vanished into family investments I never saw returns from. The cruelest part? They made me thank them for it. "We're teaching you financial responsibility," James would say, reviewing my expense reports like I was a criminal. Meanwhile, they were stealing millions, using my own money to fund their lavish lifestyle, while keeping me dependent on their approval for a $20 lunch. But then I discovered something even bigger that night. The money wasn't just stolen. It was being laundered through political campaigns. 3 state senators, 2 federal judges, all receiving generous donations from companies funded entirely by my inheritance. My parents hadn't just left me money, they'd left me evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Boston's power structure. I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof that would stand up in court and, more importantly, in the court of public opinion. That's when I realized if I wanted to escape, I'd have to play a longer, colder game than they'd ever expect from their grateful little charity case. The Massachusetts Bar Association conference 4 years ago should have been just another networking obligation. 300 lawyers in a stuffy ballroom, making small talk over rubber chicken and lukewarm coffee. But that's where I met Marcus Sullivan. He wasn't the kind of lawyer who worked the room. Instead, he stood by the windows, watching the crowd like he was reading a chessboard 3 moves ahead. Senior partner at Sullivan and Associates, the only firm in Boston that had never taken Harrington money. "You're the Harrington foster daughter," he said the moment I approached him. Not a question, just a statement. The one they parade around at charity events. "Adopted daughter," I corrected automatically, the rehearsed response slipping out. His eyes narrowed. "Is that what you tell yourself, or what they tell you to say?" Something in his tone made me really look at him. 62 years old, built like a boxer who'd gone to Yale, with scars on his knuckles that said his education hadn't all come from books. "I've seen this before," he said quietly. "The micro-expressions when they mention your name. The way you flinch when Victoria touches you. The practice smile that never quite reaches your eyes." My chest tightened. 25 years of perfect performance. And this stranger had seen through it in minutes. "If you ever want to talk," he said, slipping me his card, "about anything. Legal matters or otherwise." That night, I did something I'd never done before. I called him. "First rule," Marcus said when we met at a diner in Southie, miles from Beacon Hill's surveillance. "If you want to escape them, you need evidence. Not suspicions, not feelings. Evidence that would hold up in federal court." He taught me about RICO statutes, about financial forensics, about the difference between civil and criminal liability. But most importantly, he gave me something I'd never had, an ally who saw the Harringtons for what they really were. "They're going to escalate when they sense you pulling away," he warned. "People like them always do. So when they do, and they will, you need to be ready to document everything." That's when he gave me the first recording device. Tiny, magnetic, designed to look like a button. Every conversation, every threat, every forced signature, you're building a case, Elise. And when you're ready, we're going to burn their whole kingdom down. For the first time in my life, I had hope. And a plan. The full scope of what I stood to lose became crystal clear 6 months into building my case. Marcus had connected me with a forensic accountant who worked off the books, tracing money flows through encrypted channels the Harringtons thought were invisible. $47 million, she said, sliding a folder across the table at our meeting in a Chinatown restaurant. Withdrawn over 4 years through 163 separate transactions. Small enough to avoid federal reporting requirements, frequent enough to drain you dry. But it wasn't just theft. The money had been washed through a network that made my stomach turn. 3 state senators, Morrison, Blackwood, and Reeves, had received $2.3 million each through consulting fees from companies that existed only on paper, companies funded entirely by my inheritance. "There's more," the accountant continued. "The federal judges, Harper and Steinberg. They've been getting quarterly payments through a real estate investment trust. Your money bought their vacation homes in Martha's Vineyard." The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about my trust fund. It was about purchased influence at every level of Massachusetts government. My parents' money, meant to secure my future, had instead built a corruption network that controlled courts, legislation, and law enforcement. But here was the kicker. Federal RICO statutes had a 5-year limit. In 72 hours, the first transactions would age out of the prosecution range. Every day I waited, another piece of evidence became legally worthless. If you don't file by Monday, Marcus had warned, you lose $8 million worth of claims. By December, that number hits $20 million. The Harringtons must have known. That's why Victoria had been pushing so hard lately, insisting I sign new power of attorney documents for estate planning purposes. Then, the ultimate betrayal, I intercepted an email meant for James. Dr. Thompson, a psychiatrist who'd never examined me, had already prepared commitment papers. The diagnosis? Delusional disorder with paranoid features. The recommendation? Immediate involuntary commitment for her own safety. She's become obsessed with conspiracy theories about the family finances, the report read. She poses a danger to herself and potentially others. They were going to have me declared mentally incompetent. Once that happened, Victoria would gain full control of whatever remained of my inheritance. My testimony would be worthless. My evidence would be dismissed as the ravings of a disturbed mind. The commitment hearing was scheduled for November 16th, the day after my birthday party. That's when it hit me. The party wasn't a celebration. It was meant to be my last public appearance as a legally competent adult. Whatever they planned to do there would be witnessed by Boston's most powerful people, all of whom would testify that I'd seemed disturbed or erratic. I had one chance, one night. And if I failed, I'd lose more than money. I'd lose my freedom, my sanity, and any hope of justice. The clock wasn't just ticking. It was screaming. James's threats against my legal career weren't empty posturing. He'd already demonstrated his reach 3 times. Sarah Chin, a paralegal who'd helped me photocopying documents after hours, was fired within 48 hours for performance issues despite glowing reviews. Michael Torres, a junior associate who'd asked too many questions about the Harrington accounts, found himself suddenly transferred to the firm's satellite office in Worcester. Jennifer Park, who'd offered to testify about witnessing Victoria forge my signature, received a call from the State Bar about anonymous complaints regarding her professional conduct. One phone call, James had said over dinner last week, cutting his steak with surgical precision. That's all it takes. Every managing partner in Boston owes me favors. Every judge golfs at my club. You think that Harvard law degree means something? I can make it worth less than the paper it's printed on. He wasn't bluffing. I'd already been mysteriously passed over for partnership track, despite billing more hours than any other fourth-year associate. My name had been removed from a high-profile class action case without explanation. 14 firms, from white shoe establishments to boutique practices, had rejected my applications with identical language about not being the right fit. The Harrington reach extended beyond Boston. Through their connections, they'd poisoned wells in New York, D.C., even Los Angeles. Email threads I'd managed to hack showed coordinated efforts to blacklist me nationwide. She's unstable, Victoria had written to the managing partner of Cromwell and Associates. We've tried to help her, but she has paranoid tendencies. Hiring her would be a liability risk. But yesterday, everything shifted. An encrypted email appeared in my personal account, the one the Harringtons didn't monitor. The sender, Special Agent Diana Walsh, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Miss Harrington, we've been investigating irregularities in campaign finance records that trace back to accounts connected to your trust fund. If you have documentation that could assist our investigation, we're prepared to offer witness protection and ensure your professional credentials remain intact regardless of any retaliation attempts. Time is of the essence. They already knew. The FBI had been building their own case, but they needed an insider. Someone with access to family records, private conversations, internal documents. They needed me. Marcus had been right all along. This was bigger than family theft. It was a federal conspiracy case waiting to explode. And I held the detonator. I typed my response carefully. I have 1,147 pages of documentation, 234 audio recordings, and 89 witnesses ready to testify. I can provide everything. Monday morning, November 16th. Her reply came within minutes. Understood. Whatever happens between now and then, document everything. We will be monitoring. The birthday party was tomorrow. The commitment hearing the day after. But now I had federal backup waiting in the wings. The Harringtons thought they were closing a trap. They had no idea they were walking into one. Have you ever been trapped in a situation where standing up meant losing everything, but staying silent meant losing yourself? Drop a comment below about a time you had to choose between safety and truth. Your story matters, and you're not alone in this fight. If this resonates with you, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss what happens when the tables finally turn. The dinner before my birthday party was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Every word sharpened to cut. Tomorrow will be special, Victoria said, her voice silk over steel. I'm looking forward to it, I replied, matching her tone. Everyone important will be there. James didn't look up from his phone. 127 people to be exact, Victoria corrected, her smile sharp as winter. That's very specific. I kept my voice neutral. I like precision, don't you, dear? I'm learning to appreciate it. Good. Learning is important, she paused. While you still can. The threat hung between us like a blade. The Blackwoods confirmed, James interjected. The senators, too. How wonderful. My fingers found the recording device in my pocket, reassuringly cold against my skin. They're eager to see you. Victoria's eyes glittered. To see how you've developed. I'm sure I won't disappoint. No, she said slowly. I don't think you will. The photographer will be there at 8, James added. To capture memories? I asked. To capture truth, Victoria replied, her eyes boring into mine. We ate in silence for 30 seconds. 30 seconds that felt like hours. Your dress arrived, she finally said. The blue one from 5 years ago. Waste not, want not. Besides, her smile turned cruel, it's fitting. How so? You'll understand tomorrow. Will I? Oh yes. Clarity is coming, Elise. For everyone? Her fork paused midway to her mouth. What does that mean? Nothing. Just agreeing with you. You've been doing a lot of that lately. James's voice carried suspicion. I've learned my place. Have you? Victoria leaned forward, a predator scenting blood. And where's that? Wherever you decide it should be. Good girl. The condescension dripped. That's the first smart thing you've said in months. I aim to please. Tomorrow you'll do more than please. She stood. You'll perform. Perform one last time for the family. After tomorrow, everything changes, James added, pushing back his chair. Yes, I said quietly, a tremor of power in my voice. Everything. Victoria froze at the doorway. What was that? I said, yes, I understand. She studied me for a long moment. Dr. Thompson will be there. The psychiatrist. Just a friend, but good to have professional opinions close by. Her smile was pure predator. In case anyone seems disturbed, of course. Safety first. Remember that tomorrow, Elise? Safety first. They left me alone with the wreckage of dinner and the immense weight of what was coming. Alone in my room, I opened my laptop to the encrypted folder Marcus had taught me to hide. 1,847 pages of evidence, organized with the precision of a federal indictment. Bank statements, forged signatures, shell company registrations, email threads discussing my management, like I was livestock. The 234 audio files were backed up across 7 cloud services, each with different trigger conditions. If my phone detected sudden impact, like being shoved to the ground, everything would autoupload to pre-selected recipients, the FBI, the Boston Globe, the Wall Street Journal, even WikiLeaks. Because why not? Marcus called it a dead man switch, though he'd winced at the term. If they get physical, he'd said, the accelerometer in your phone triggers the upload. 10 seconds later, everything goes live. They touch you, they destroy themselves. I'd tested it a dozen times. Dropped my phone from different heights, different angles. Each time, the system worked flawlessly. A small notification would appear, emergency protocols activated, files transmitted. But the real beauty was in the timing. The emails were scheduled for 8:47 p.m. tomorrow, exactly when Victoria planned to make her grand speech about family and charity. Each recipient would get different pieces of the puzzle, ensuring the story couldn't be buried or spun. The Wall Street Journal would receive the financial crimes. The FBI would get the money laundering evidence. The IRS would see 2 decades of tax fraud. Local news would get the juiciest family drama. Social media influencers with millions of followers would receive video clips perfectly sized for viral sharing. I pulled up the metadata from the security cameras I'd had installed in the main hall 2 weeks ago, disguised as routine maintenance. 3 angles, all streaming to off-site servers. Whatever happened tomorrow would be captured in 4K resolution with timestamp authentication that would hold up in court. My phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca Martinez at the Journal. Story ready to run on your signal. Front page above the fold. Everything was in place. For years of planning condensed into one moment of calculated risk. Tomorrow they would try to destroy me in front of everyone who mattered. Tomorrow I would let them try. The pattern had been there all along, hidden in 20 years of family videos I digitized last month. 6 incidents, same trigger, same result. Christmas 2018, Victoria whispered, "Remember your duty, James," when her sister questioned their parenting. James threw a crystal glass against the wall. Thanksgiving 2019, the phrase again when a reporter asked about irregularities in the charity finances. James grabbed the man's collar, had to be pulled away. The graduation party, the merger celebration, 2 board meetings. Each time, Victoria deployed those 4 words like launching a missile. And James, reliable as clockwork, would explode into violence. It was conditioning, Pavlovian. 20 years of psychological manipulation that turned a grown man into a weapon activated by his wife's whisper. I'd found Victoria's journals in the attic, dated back to when they first adopted me. James requires careful management, she'd written. His temper's useful, but needs direction. The phrase works best when he's already agitated. Public settings increase compliance. His fear of judgment makes him more susceptible to suggestion. She'd been training him like an attack dog, using his insecurities about his working-class background, his fear of losing status, his desperate need for her approval. The violence was never random. It was Victoria's violence, executed by James's hands. But tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow there would be cameras, federal witnesses, a room full of Boston's elite with their phones ready to record any drama. The newest security footage from the main hall showed something interesting. The camera angles I'd requested captured not just the center of the room, but the corners where Victoria typically stood during speeches. The audio pickup was studio quality, able to capture whispers from 30 feet away. If she whispered to James tomorrow, when she whispered to James tomorrow, it would be recorded. The trigger phrase, the command, the resulting violence. All documented with timestamp verification that would prove premeditation. I pulled up the criminal code on my laptop. Assault with conspiracy. Aggravated assault in front of witnesses. If James touched me after Victoria's command, it wouldn't just be family drama. It would be evidence of systematic abuse, captured in perfect clarity, automatically distributed to law enforcement before anyone could delete or deny. 20 years of conditioning had made James a loaded gun. Tomorrow, Victoria would pull the trigger, and the recoil would destroy them both. My phone lit up with an encrypted message from Rebecca Martinez. Boston Society pages are buzzing about tomorrow. My editor cleared the entire front section. Whatever happens, we're ready. Rebecca had been investigating the Harringtons for 2 years, following a tip about campaign finance violations that led her into a maze of shell companies and political payoffs. When Marcus connected us 6 months ago, she nearly cried seeing my documentation. "This is Pulitzer material," she'd said, scanning through the evidence. But more importantly, this is justice. She wasn't alone. The network Marcus had helped me build was extraordinary. 89 witnesses ready to testify, each with their own piece of the puzzle. There was Robert Fitzgerald, former CFO of Harrington Industries, who'd been forced out when he questioned suspicious transfers. He'd kept copies of everything. 10 years of double books showing two different realities, the one presented to investors and the real one. The USB drive he'd given me contained enough financial fraud to trigger a federal audit that would last years. Maria Santos, who'd been our housekeeper for 15 years, had documented every instance of abuse she'd witnessed. The locked rooms when I disappointed them, the meals withheld as punishment, the medications forced on me without prescriptions. Dr. Alan Morrison, no relation to the senator, had been my pediatrician after the adoption. He'd kept notes about injuries that didn't match the explanations, behavioral changes that suggested trauma, requests from Victoria to prescribe sedatives for a 4-year-old child. "I've waited 25 years to tell someone," he'd said when I approached him. But the most damaging witness would be Thomas Harrington, James's younger brother, who'd been cut out of the family business for asking too many questions. He had recordings from the 1990s, before I was even adopted, showing the pattern of financial manipulation and violence that defined the Harrington empire. "They did it to me first," he told me. "Drained my trust fund, destroyed my reputation when I fought back. I've been waiting for someone brave enough to stand up to them." The FBI had interviewed 30 of these witnesses already, building their RICO case independently. Agent Walsh had confirmed that morning, "We have enough to move forward, but your evidence is the keystone. It connects everything." The irony was beautiful. Victoria and James thought tomorrow's party would be my public humiliation, surrounded by their powerful friends who would witness my breakdown and support their commitment petition. Instead, they'd invited 127 potential witnesses to their own destruction. Judges who would have to recuse themselves from future proceedings. Politicians who would distance themselves from the scandal. Society figures who would provide detailed accounts of whatever violence occurred. They built the perfect stage for their own downfall, decorated it with flowers, and sent engraved invitations to watch it happen. The Harrington Industries Board had one vulnerability they'd never imagined would matter, Section 14.3 of their corporate bylaws, which James himself had insisted upon after a rival scandal in 2015. Any board member or executive who commits an act of violence at a company-affiliated event shall be subject to immediate termination without severance and shall forfeit all voting shares to the board's emergency trust. The birthday party, while personal, was being paid for by Harrington Industries as a client entertainment expense. I had the receipts. $500,000 charged to corporate accounts, justified as relationship building with key stakeholders, by their own classification. Tomorrow was a company event. Marcus had laughed when he found it. James wrote his own professional death warrant. But there was more. 3 years ago, James had been arrested for assault at a private club in Manhattan. Victoria had made it disappear with money and connections, but the arrest record existed. The victim had signed an NDA in exchange for $2 million. My money, I discovered. But NDAs didn't apply to federal criminal investigations. A second arrest for assault would violate his pretrial diversion agreement. He'd face mandatory jail time. No negotiations possible. Then there was Victoria's hidden weakness. She'd been building a case against James for 2 years, preparing for a divorce that would let her take everything. I'd found her lawyer's files hidden in her study, photographs of James with other women, records of hidden assets, even a psychological evaluation suggesting he was unfit to manage finances. She planned to trigger his violence tomorrow, document it, and use it as grounds for both divorce and corporate takeover. What she didn't know was that conspiracy to incite violence was a federal crime, especially when it resulted in assault. The security cameras would capture her whisper. The audio would record the trigger phrase. The timestamp would show James's immediate reaction. Together, it would prove not just assault, but conspiracy, premeditation, and 20 years of conditioned abuse. The beautiful thing about narcissists, Marcus had explained, is they document everything. They can't help themselves. Every victory must be recorded. Every manipulation must be perfected. He was right. Victoria had kept journals, recordings, even videos of her training sessions with James. She thought they were trophies. Tomorrow they'd become evidence. My phone buzzed with a message from Agent Walsh. Judge Harrison signed off on surveillance warrants for tomorrow. Every federal agent in Boston knows what's happening. The moment James touches you, we move. I pulled up the final piece. A contract Victoria had signed last week, giving her power of attorney over James in case of incapacitation. She'd been planning to have him committed after the assault, take control of everything. Instead, she'd documented her motive for conspiracy. Tomorrow at 8:47 p.m., when she whispered those 4 words, Victoria would sign both their death warrants. And I would be the pen. The Harrington Ballroom had been transformed into what looked like a coronation hall. $500,000 had bought crystal chandeliers rented from the Met, orchids flown in from Thailand, and enough champagne to drown Boston's collective conscience. 127 guests arrived in waves of designer gowns and Swiss watches. Senator Morrison, fresh from blocking a healthcare bill, kissed Victoria's cheek. Judge Harper, who'd ruled in favor of Harrington Industries 6 times, admired the ice sculptures. CEO after CEO, all bound to the Harringtons by debt, favor, or blackmail, filled the room with nervous laughter. I stood in my 5-year-old blue dress, the one I'd worn to my Harvard Law graduation, before I knew what my family really was. Victoria had chosen it deliberately, a subtle, vicious reminder of when I'd been obedient, grateful, controllable. At least. Victoria's voice cut through the crowd. She wore a $50,000 Dior gown that screamed dominance. Come greet the Blackwoods. They're dying to hear about your little job. Mrs. Blackwood, whose husband ran the state's largest development firm, looked at me with the kind of pity reserved for 3-legged dogs. Still at that small firm, dear? Victoria mentioned, "You've been having difficulties, some transitions," I replied carefully, feeling the reassuring weight of the recording device against my side. Well, Mr. Blackwood chuckled. Not everyone can handle real pressure. Good thing you have family to fall back on. The irony was so thick I could taste it. These people, who'd built empires on corruption and my stolen money, discussing pressure while drinking champagne bought with blood. Dr. Thompson arrived at 7:30, making no effort to hide his purpose. He introduced himself to guests as a friend of the family, specializing in difficult cases. The commitment papers were probably in his briefcase, waiting for Victoria's signal. "Elise looks tired," he said loudly to Judge Harper. "The stress of maintaining false narratives can be exhausting." "Indeed," the judge replied, eyes avoiding mine. Young people today face unique challenges. They were laying groundwork, creating witnesses to my supposed instability. Every conversation felt like testimony being prepared. At 8:15, Victoria clinked her glass. The room fell silent. "Before we toast to Elise's birthday," she began, her voice carrying perfectly, "I want to share something about family, about charity, about the burdens we choose to carry." James stood beside her, his jaw tight, hands clenched. He'd been drinking since 7, unusual for him. Victoria had been pouring his drinks herself, each one stronger than the last. The cameras were rolling, the phones were recording, the stage was set. 25 years ago, Victoria continued, her voice dripping with false warmth, "James and I made a decision that changed our lives. We took in a broken, traumatized child who had nothing." The crowd murmured appreciatively. I saw phones lifting, recording what they thought would be a heartwarming speech. "Elise came to us damaged." Victoria emphasized the word like driving a nail. For years old, covered in her parents' blood, unable to speak for months. The doctors said she might never recover. This was new. She'd never mentioned blood before. Never claimed I'd been unable to speak. She was rewriting history for her audience, painting me as more broken than I'd ever been. We spent millions on therapy, education, opportunities. Her eyes found mine across the room. Harvard wasn't cheap. Neither were the mistakes along the way. "Mistakes?" Senator Morrison asked, playing his part. "Oh, the broken items, the tantrums, the incidents." Victoria sighed dramatically. Raising someone else's child is the ultimate charity, but it requires infinite patience. James shifted beside her, his face flushed from alcohol and building rage. His eyes kept darting to me, then away, like he was fighting something inside himself. Some people, Victoria continued, her voice hardening, no matter how much you give them, remain fundamentally ungrateful. They bite the hand that feeds them. They spread lies about those who save them. The room's atmosphere shifted. This wasn't a toast. It was a public execution. We've recently discovered that Elise has been making disturbing accusations about our family, Victoria announced. Paranoid fantasies about stolen money, conspiracies, abuse that never happened. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Dr. Thompson stepped forward slightly, ready to play his role as the concerned psychiatrist. It breaks our hearts, James slurred, the alcohol thick in his voice. After everything we've done, which is why, Victoria's voice hardened further, we've made the difficult decision that Elise needs professional help. Real help. The kind that requires commitment. The word hung in the air. Everyone understood what she meant. But first, she raised her glass. Let's toast the birthday girl. Elise, come here. It wasn't a request. 127 pairs of eyes turned to me, waiting to see if I'd comply. The cameras kept rolling. The recordings continued. I walked forward, each step measured, my phone heavy in my pocket. The accelerometer armed and ready. That's a good girl, Victoria purred as I approached. Always best to know your place. James's breathing was audible now, harsh and rapid. His hands trembled. Victoria leaned close to him, her lips barely moving. I saw her mouth form the words. What do you think happens when a narcissist's perfect plan backfires in front of everyone they're trying to impress? Drop your prediction in the comments below. If you're holding your breath right now, imagine how I felt standing there. Like this video if you're ready to see justice served, and share it with someone who needs to know that truth always finds a way. Remember your duty, James. The words were barely a whisper, but the microphones I'd planted caught them perfectly. Victoria's lips brushed his ear, her hands squeezing his arm in the exact pressure point she'd trained him to respond to. The change in James was instant. His pupils dilated, his breathing stopped for a second, then resumed in sharp, ragged bursts. 20 years of conditioning took over, bypassing conscious thought. His hand came up fast, catching me in the chest with enough force to send me backwards. My heel caught on the marble floor's edge. Time slowed as I fell. The chandelier light spun overhead like dying stars. I hit the cold marble hard. Pain shot through my shoulder, my hip, my head. Blood filled my mouth where I'd bitten my lip. My dress tore along the seam, the sound sharp as breaking glass. The room exploded in gasps, screams, the crash of dropped champagne flutes. 127 of Boston's most powerful people had just witnessed assault. But I didn't get up. I lay there for 5 long seconds, feeling my phone vibrate against my ribs. The accelerometer had triggered. 1,847 pages of evidence were uploading. 234 audio files were being distributed. 89 witnesses were being notified. Then, lying on that cold floor with blood on my lips and my adoptive parents standing over me like conquering heroes, I did something they'd never expected. I laughed. It started low. A chuckle that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than my chest. Then it grew. Became something rich and dark and absolutely certain. Ha ha ha, each sound deliberate, measured. Finally. You finally did it. Victoria's face went white. James stumbled backward, the fog of conditioning clearing as he realized what he'd done. What? Victoria started. Check your phones, I said, still lying there, blood dripping onto white marble. All of you. Check them now. The notifications were already starting. Pings and buzzes filled the room as every guest received something. A news alert. A social media tag. An email marked urgent. What did you do? Victoria's voice cracked. I smiled up at her. This woman who'd stolen my childhood, my money, my identity. This woman who'd trained her husband like an attack dog and set him loose on a room full of witnesses. I didn't do anything, I said, finally sitting up, my phone still recording everything. You did. And everyone just watched. The first scream came from Senator Morrison's wife, staring at her phone in horror. The dominoes had started falling. I stood slowly, deliberately, brushing marble dust from my torn dress. Blood still trickled from my lip, and I let it. Every camera in the room was on me now. Phones, security feeds, and the news crew that Rebecca Martinez had snuck in as event photographers. "Thank you, James," I said, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "You just gave me exactly what I needed." My phone buzzed again. I pulled it out, showing the screen to the room. Emergency protocols activated. Files transmitted to 47 recipients. "You're insane," Victoria hissed. "Dr. Thompson, she's having an episode." "No," I interrupted. "But you might want to check your email, doctor." The Massachusetts Medical Board just received an interesting package about pre-signed commitment papers for a patient you've never examined. Thompson's phone chimed. His face went gray as he read. 15 news organizations just received 1,847 pages of documentation, I announced, walking toward the projection screen Victoria had used for her speech. Financial records, forged signatures, shell companies, money laundering through campaign donations. I connected my phone to the screen. The first document appeared, a bank transfer authorization with my forged signature, dated when I was 12 years old. That's fabricated," James stammered. "Is it?" I swiped to the next image. "This is from Harrington Industries' internal audit. Your own CFO documented it before you fired him. Robert, would you like to comment?" Robert Fitzgerald stepped out from behind a pillar where he'd been waiting. "Every word she's saying is true. I have 10 years of records proving systematic theft." The room erupted. Senator Morrison was already heading for the door, but found FBI agents blocking his path. "Oh, did I mention?" I continued, my voice steady despite the pain. "The FBI has been watching this party. Agent Walsh, I believe you have something to say." Diana Walsh entered with 6 other agents, her badge gleaming. "James Harrington, you're under arrest for assault." "Victoria Harrington, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault, wire fraud, and violations of the RICO Act." "This is ridiculous," Victoria shrieked. "We're her parents. We saved her." "No," I said, swiping to the next document. "The real police report from my parents' accident. You killed them. This is the toxicology report showing my father was drugged before the crash. The same sedatives you've been giving me for 20 years. The prescription in your name, Victoria." The silence was absolute. Every transaction, every forged document, every crime, it's all being published as we speak. I looked at the crowd of complicit elite, including the names of everyone who benefited. Phones began ringing frantically, lawyers being called, PR teams being awakened. The empire was crumbling, and everyone could hear it fall. The projection screen lit up with a web of financial transactions that looked like a spider's web made of numbers. Each strand led back to my trust fund, and each connection had a name attached. $47 million, I announced, zooming in on the total stolen over 4 years through 163 separate transactions. But that's not the interesting part. I clicked to the next slide. Beacon Holdings, LLC. "That's you, Senator Morrison. $2.3 million for consulting services that never existed." Morrison's wife was pulling at his arm, trying to leave, but the FBI agents weren't moving. "Heritage Investment Partners, Judge Harper. That's your vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, bought with my inheritance. The same money you used to rule in Harrington Industries' favor 6 times." Harper dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the marble, the sound like a gunshot in the silence. "Should I continue?" I asked, swiping through more documents. "There are 12 shell companies, 3 senators, 2 federal judges, 1 governor's chief of staff, all funded by a murdered couple's orphan daughter." Victoria lunged toward me, but Agent Walsh caught her arm. "I wouldn't do that, Mrs. Harrington. These are lies." Victoria screamed. "Photoshopped. Fabricated." Actually, Rebecca Martinez stepped forward, her press badge now visible. "The Wall Street Journal has been independently verifying these documents for 6 months. Our forensic accountants confirmed every transaction. The story goes live in," she checked her phone, 3 minutes. I switched to the next slide. Screenshots of Victoria's emails. "Let's talk about the murders, Victoria. These are your emails to Dr. Marcus Steinfeld discussing the problem of my parents' life insurance policy. The one that named their daughter as sole beneficiary. The policy you couldn't touch unless they died and you became my guardian. The room was chaos now. Some guests were crying. Others were on phones with lawyers. Senator Blackwood's wife had fainted. But here's my favorite, I said, pulling up the final document. This is from yesterday. Victoria's divorce lawyer's files. She's been planning to frame James for everything, take over Harrington Industries, and have him committed. James turned to Victoria, his face a mask of betrayal. You were going to. Shut up, she snapped at him, the mask fully gone now. You weak, pathetic. Please continue, Agent Walsh said, recording everything. Anything you say can and will be used against you. The hunters had become the hunted, and there was nowhere left to run. Agent Walsh stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. James Harrington, you're under arrest for assault and battery, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and violations of the RICO Act. 2 agents moved in, handcuffs gleaming under the chandeliers. James didn't resist. He seemed almost relieved as the metal clicked around his wrists. Victoria Harrington, Walsh continued. You're under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and murder in the first degree of Catherine and William Brennan. Murder. The word rippled through the crowd. The toxicology reports Ms. Harrington provided, combined with your documented purchase of the same sedatives, constitute probable cause. You'll be held without bail pending trial. As the handcuffs touched Victoria's wrists, her phone rang. She couldn't answer it, but I recognized the ringtone. The Board of Directors emergency line. Marcus answered his own phone, listened, then announced, the Harrington Industries Board has convened an emergency session. Effective immediately, James Harrington is terminated for cause under Section 14.3 of the corporate bylaws, violence at a company event. All voting shares are transferred to the emergency trust. No, James shouted. This is my company. My father's company was, Marcus corrected. The board has also voted to freeze all corporate accounts pending federal investigation. Victoria's signing authority is revoked. Another phone rang. Senator Morrison's. His aide answered, went pale, and whispered urgently in his ear. What do you mean the Times has everything? Morrison hissed. More phones, more panic. The dominoes weren't just falling. They were creating an avalanche. Rebecca Martinez held up her phone, showing a rapidly climbing number. The video of James pushing Elise has been viewed 2.3 million times in the last 10 minutes. Hashtag Harrington Assault is trending worldwide. The stock market opens in Asia in 2 hours, someone whispered. Harrington Industries will be worthless by morning. 3 federal judges in attendance had already recused themselves from any future proceedings. 12 board members from various companies were resigning via email. The Massachusetts Attorney General was announcing a widespread corruption probe. Your parents' estate will be fully restored, Judge Chin told me. With interest and penalties, you're looking at approximately $127 million. But I wasn't looking at the money. I was watching Victoria's face as she realized her entire world, built on my parents' bodies and my stolen childhood, was collapsing in real time. This isn't over, she hissed at me as agents led her away. You're right, I replied. This is just the beginning. The trial will be spectacular. The ballroom doors closed behind them with a sound like the ceiling of a tomb. Within an hour, the Harrington empire collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Bloomberg broke the news at 9:04 p.m. Harrington Industries stock futures plummet 40% on fraud allegations. By 10:15, it was down 60%. Trading was halted, but everyone knew it was too late. 8 major partners canceled contracts via emergency conference calls. Westfield Development pulled their $200 million project. Boston General Hospital ended their pharmaceutical partnership. Even the country club, the one James's grandfather had founded, revoked the family membership. Victoria's phone, now in FBI custody, received 47 emails in 30 minutes. Each one was another resignation, another severed tie, another ally jumping ship. The subject lines told the story. Effective immediately. Termination of relationship. Cease all contact, please. Victoria tried one last manipulation as agents led her past me. We can make a deal. I have information about the others. Morrison, Harper, everyone. I'll testify. The FBI already has everything they need, Agent Walsh informed her. Miss Harrington's evidence is comprehensive. James looked at me with something like clarity for the first time in years. The conditioning, he said quietly. You knew about the conditioning. I documented everything, James. Every trigger, every response. Your therapy records will help in your defense. Victoria's manipulation might get you reduced charges. I'm sorry, he said, and for a moment, I saw the man he might have been without Victoria's poison. I'm so sorry. But apologies couldn't undo 25 years. They couldn't bring back my parents or return my stolen childhood. The guests were fleeing now, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. Senator Morrison was on the phone with his lawyer, his wife crying beside him. Judge Harper had already left, but reporters were waiting outside. The Blackwoods were trying to leave through the service entrance, only to find more photographers. Miss Harrington, Agent Walsh approached me. We'll need you to come to the federal building tomorrow for a full deposition. I'll be there at 8 a.m., I confirmed. The ballroom, which had been so perfectly arranged for my humiliation, was now a crime scene. Yellow tape was being strung up. Evidence markers placed. The ice sculptures were melting, champagne going flat. Victoria's careful stage direction destroyed. The kingdom hadn't just fallen. It had been obliterated. By midnight, the court had issued emergency orders. I stood in the same ballroom, now empty except for FBI agents and my legal team, as Judge Chin made it official. Given the evidence of systematic theft and fraud, this court appoints Elise Harrington as temporary administrator of all disputed assets. Effective immediately. Marcus handed me a folder. The family accounts are frozen except for your access. The houses, the cars, the investments. You control everything while the criminal cases proceed. The board wants to meet with you Monday, another lawyer added. They're hoping you'll consider taking James's position, at least temporarily. I almost laughed. The same board that had ignored my existence for 25 years now wanted me to save their company. I'll meet with them, I said, but on my terms. My phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. Miss Harrington, this is Amanda Foster from Cromwell and Associates. We'd like to offer you a senior partnership. Name your salary. I declined. For more firms called in the next 10 minutes, each offer more desperate than the last. What will you do? Marcus asked. Start my own firm, I decided. Specializing in financial fraud and family abuse cases. Pro bono for those who can't afford it. Rebecca Martinez was typing furiously. Can I quote you on that? Quote this, I said. The Harrington name is about to mean something different. Something better. I walked through the ruined ballroom, my heels clicking on marble now marked with evidence tags. The portrait of James's grandfather watched from the wall. Another tyrant who'd built wealth on others' misery. Take it down, I told the federal agents. Take them all down. My phone showed 200 messages. Interview requests. Book deals. Documentary offers. But also something else. Messages from other victims. Other adoptees. Other survivors. Other people who'd been crushed by powerful families. You gave us hope, one read. You showed us it's possible to fight back. That was worth more than the $127 million the court would restore. Worth more than the companies begging to hire me. Worth more than Victoria's empire. I'd taken back more than money or status. I'd taken back my story. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in social destruction. Victoria's carefully curated image disintegrated across every platform. The 12 charity boards she dominated for decades held emergency meetings. She was removed from each one within hours. The Boston Society Register, which had featured the Harringtons for 6 generations, struck their name from the rolls. The Met Gala Committee, the Symphony Board, the Museum of Fine Arts. Every institution that had courted Harrington money now treated the name like poison. Harrington Industries loses $2.1 billion in market value, the Financial Times reported. The stock had dropped 78% before trading was suspended indefinitely. Shareholders were filing class action lawsuits. The SEC announced a decade-long audit going back to when James's father ran the company. But the real devastation came from the witnesses. All 89 of them went public within days, giving interviews, sharing documentation, posting evidence on social media. Maria Santos appeared on 60 Minutes, showing photographs of a 4-year-old me locked in a closet for crying about my dead parents. Dr. Morrison published his medical notes in the New England Journal of Medicine, sparking a national conversation about mandatory reporting laws. Thomas Harrington, James's brother, held his own press conference. This family has been corrupt for 3 generations. My father, James's father, built this empire on fraud. I have documents going back to the 1960s. The political fallout was swift and brutal. Senator Morrison resigned to focus on his legal defense. Senator Blackwood withdrew from his re-election campaign. Senator Reeves was expelled from 3 committees pending investigation. Judge Harper took early retirement, his legacy destroyed overnight. Judge Steinberg fled to his non-extradition home in Switzerland, abandoning his federal pension rather than face charges. The Boston Globe published a series called The Harrington Web, mapping every connection, every payoff, every crime. It would win a Pulitzer, but more importantly, it triggered investigations into 15 other wealthy families suspected of similar crimes. This is bigger than just the Harringtons, the Massachusetts Attorney General announced. We're looking at systematic corruption among Boston's elite spanning decades. My phone showed the numbers. 234 audio files had been played 50 million times across various platforms. The video of James pushing me had reached 100 million views. Hashtag Justice for Elise had generated 2 billion impressions. But the number that mattered most was 47, the number of abuse survivors who'd reached out saying my story gave them courage to pursue their own justice. You didn't just destroy them, Marcus told me as we watched the news coverage. You started a revolution. Victoria and James would face trial in 6 months. Federal prosecutors were seeking 20 years for James, life for Victoria, given the murder charges. Their lawyers were already discussing plea deals, but the FBI wasn't interested in negotiation. The empire hadn't just fallen. It had been erased from history, except as a cautionary tale. The ripples spread far beyond Boston. 3 state senators from Connecticut, New York, and Rhode Island announced sudden resignations after journalists connected them to Harrington money. A federal investigation called Operation Broken Trust expanded to include 43 politicians across New England. The FBI established a dedicated task force with 50 agents working full-time on cases stemming from my evidence. Massachusetts passed Elise's Law in an emergency session, the strongest protection for adopted children in the nation. It required quarterly welfare checks, independent financial audits, and mandatory reporting of any signs of abuse. 7 other states announced similar legislation within a week. The documentary offers kept coming, but it was the call from Samantha Reed that stopped me cold. She was 17, living with adoptive parents in Chicago who'd been draining her trust fund. Your story saved my life, she said through tears. I showed your video to my teacher. She called the police. They found everything. The forged signatures, the stolen money, all of it. By week's end, I'd heard from 200 similar cases. Marcus helped me establish the Brennan Foundation, named for my biological parents. With an initial funding of $10 million from the recovered assets, we would provide free legal services to adoptees and foster children facing financial exploitation. Harrington Industries, meanwhile, was being dissected and sold piece by piece. The board begged me to take over, to save what could be saved. I agreed to one meeting. You want me to save a company built on blood money? I asked the 12 board members who'd enabled James for years. The same company that funded my abuse? The employees, the interim CEO pleaded. 3,000 people who had nothing to do with this. That was the leverage they thought they had. But I'd already thought of that. I'll buy the company, I announced, for $1. In exchange, I'll guarantee all employee pensions and jobs for 2 years while we restructure. But the Harrington name dies today. The company will be rebuilt as Brennan Industries, and 50% of profits will go to victims of financial abuse. They had no choice. The company was worthless without my intervention, and they knew it. The sale was finalized in 72 hours. The first act of Brennan Industries was to establish a $100 million victim compensation fund. The second was to fire every executive who'd been complicit in the Harringtons' crimes. From the ashes, Rebecca Martinez wrote in her follow-up story, "Elise Harrington has built something unprecedented. Justice that pays dividends." But the real change was in the hundreds of messages flooding in daily. Survivors finding courage, lawyers offering pro bono help, journalists investigating similar cases. One message stood out from a federal prosecutor: "You've given us a template to take down corrupt dynasties nationwide." The Harrington case is now required reading at Quantico. The revolution wasn't just starting. It was spreading like wildfire. The cease and desist letter was hand-delivered to Victoria in federal detention and to James at the minimum security facility where he awaited trial. No contact for 5 years, I'd instructed Marcus. After that, only through legal counsel. No letters, no calls, no messages through third parties. Any violation will result in additional charges. Victoria had tried to write me from jail. 7 letters in the first week, oscillating between threats and manipulation. "You'll regret this. I'm still your mother. We can work this out." Each one was returned unopened and filed as evidence of harassment. James sent only one letter, which my lawyer summarized for me. An apology and a request to testify against Victoria in exchange for my forgiveness. I declined both. His apology meant nothing without consequences, and forgiveness wasn't mine to give. It belonged to my dead parents. But boundaries weren't just about them. I had to rebuild my entire life outside their shadow. I moved from the Beacon Hill mansion to a $3.5 million penthouse downtown, paid for with my own money, chosen for its floor-to-ceiling windows that let in light the Harrington house had always blocked. The old mansion was being converted into a shelter for abuse survivors. Every dark room transformed into something healing. "You could have kept it," Marcus said during the renovation planning. "Some places are too poisoned to save," I replied. "Better to let them become something else entirely." The Brennan Foundation's headquarters occupied the top floor of my new building. Glass walls, open spaces, nothing hidden. We established strict protocols, financial transparency reports published quarterly, independent audits, a survivor board of directors. Everything the Harringtons had hidden, we made visible. I hired Maria Santos as the Foundation's head of survivor services. She knew better than anyone what to look for, what questions to ask. Dr. Morrison joined our medical advisory board. Thomas Harrington, James's brother, donated his entire inheritance to the cause. "Boundaries aren't walls," I told the Boston Globe in my first major interview. "They're definitions. This is who I am. This is what I'll accept. This is what I won't." The interview went viral, particularly one quote. "For 25 years, I was told that family means accepting abuse. But real family, chosen or biological, means respect. It means safety. It means love without conditions or manipulation." Support groups started using my interview as required reading. Therapists quoted it in sessions. Universities added it to their social work curricula. But the most important boundary was internal. Every morning I looked in the mirror and reminded myself, "You are not what they did to you. You are what you chose to become." Despite them, the Harringtons had tried to make me nothing. Instead, I'd become everything they feared: independent, powerful, and absolutely beyond their control. 1 year later, I stood in the offices of Brennan Legal. My firm had generated $10 million in revenue while taking 60% of cases pro bono. We'd helped 47 families recover stolen assets, removed 23 children from abusive situations, and put 12 perpetrators behind bars. "The Times wants to know if you'll comment on the verdicts," my assistant informed me. Victoria had been sentenced to life without parole for the murders of my parents, plus 45 years for financial crimes. She'd aged a decade in a year, her designer facade crumbling into something hollow and bitter. James got 12 years with possibility of parole in 7. The jury had accepted that Victoria's psychological manipulation was a mitigating factor, though not an excuse. No comment, I decided. The verdicts speak for themselves. My book, Blood Money, a memoir of survival, had spent 30 weeks on the bestseller list. Every penny of the $5 million advance went to the foundation. The documentary had won 3 Emmys. The podcast series had 50 million downloads. But none of that was about me anymore. It was about the movement we'd started. "You have a visitor," my assistant added. "Says she's from Seattle." The woman was 35, professionally dressed, but with tired eyes. As I recognized another survivor. "My adoptive parents run a tech company," she began. "They've been stealing my patents, claiming my work is theirs. I have evidence, but no one believes me because they're so respected." "We believe you," I said simply. "Let's look at your evidence." 3 hours later, we had a case. Another empire would fall. Another survivor would reclaim their story. That evening, I walked through Boston Common, the same park where Victoria used to parade me like a prize poodle. Parents played with their children. Real families, built on love, not leverage. A teenage girl recognized me, whispered to her mother, then approached nervously. "Miss Harrington, I mean, Miss Brennan," she corrected herself shyly. "I'm adopted, too, and my parents are amazing. But I wanted to thank you. You made it safer for all of us." That was the real victory. Not the money recovered or the criminals jailed, but the systemic change. Adoption agencies had implemented new safeguards. Courts had established oversight protocols. Laws had been rewritten. As I stood in my penthouse that night, looking out at the city lights, I thought about my biological parents, Catherine and William Brennan, who died when I was 4, but somehow left me everything I needed. Not just money, but evidence of their love. Proof that I'd been wanted, chosen, cherished. The Harringtons had tried to erase them, to make me forget I'd ever been loved properly. They'd failed. Sometimes you have to fall all the way to the ground to realize you were always meant to fly. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what's really yours. And sometimes you have to laugh in the face of evil to remember that you're good. My story ends here, but yours might be just beginning. If you're trapped in a toxic situation, remember, evidence is power, boundaries are your right, and truth always finds a way. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to fight for your truth against seemingly insurmountable odds? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe and join our community.